Welcome. This is Dr. Kent Gregory, and this will be a discussion of internal analysis, and it'll be part one of that discussion. And we're following chapter 4 of Frank Rothermel's Strategic Management 5th edition, put out by McGraw-Hill in 2020. So let's move forward with internal analysis. Up to this point, we've talked a lot about the external environment, particularly the pestle analysis, so political, economic, uh, sociocultural, technological, ecological, or what I like to say environmental, and then legal. But a firm's also got to consider its internal strengths in the context of all of these external forces. So inside the firm is what we're going to be looking at. So its response has got to be dynamic, meaning it's got to react to the externals as they change and develop over time. And that's the key, over time, right there. A firm's internal strengths can also be sources of competitive advantage. So we'll talk a little bit about that over the next two parts, or this part and the following part, about how those strengths can be harnessed and what those strengths could be. So let's talk about core competencies. A basic definition of this are the unique strengths embedded in an organization that allow it to gain and sustain competitive advantage. So like everything in our discussions up to this point and continuing from now, everything about business strategy will be focused on gaining and sustaining the competitive advantage. So what are these unique strengths? Well, one category are resources. So these are the assets a firm can draw on when implementing a strategy. So these are things like cash, buildings, machinery, but then also something that's maybe a little bit hard to touch, maybe a little bit more intangible, and that's an intellectual property. Then there are capabilities. These are organizational managerial skills used to deploy resources strategically across the organization. So it's a way to harness the resources, if you will. And these are things like structures, routines, and even a company's culture. And then there are activities. So activities are distinct, fine-grained business processes. And these add incremental value to the product of a corporation or an organization by transforming inputs into goods and sausages. So these are the internal mechanisms or gears or grinding things in the sausage making factory that is the company that takes the inputs and makes an output. They can be things like order taking, delivery, invoicing, hiring, firing. An example that's used in our book are the Five Guys hamburger restaurant. So this is really interesting. Their core competency is their superior ability to deliver fresh and customized hamburgers and hand-cut fries using only high-quality ingredients. This has been something that's really been difficult for other competitors to match. What it doesn't do, and this is a key component of strategy, we often talk about what a business can or should or maybe ought to think about doing, or what it does do. But what's also important are the choices that a company makes in terms of what it deliberately does not do. So Five Guys does not advertise, nor are there drive-through windows. And there are reasons for all of this. Advertising, they want to rely on word of mouth, and that word of mouth has been pretty good. And then they also don't want drive-through windows because they want a quick and efficient delivery process, if you will, or the order process for their customers. So linking core competencies, how do we put all this together, at least in theory, from a theoretical framework to make it all work? So again, you've got your resources. These are assets like cash, buildings, machinery, IP, intellectual property that a company can draw on to craft and execute a strategy. The capabilities are the organizational and managerial skills. These tend to be intangible. And then there are activities. These are distinct business processes like order taking, invoicing, that allow the firms to add the incremental value. So the resources and the capabilities feed into the core competencies. The core competencies leverage those resources and capabilities in their activities to create the competitive advantage. And the competitive advantage is a result of or leads to superior firm performance. Now we can also take a resource-based view. So looking at those resources. So again, those resources are assets a firm or organization can draw on, or you could even say exploit when implementing a strategy. So this model or view sees resources as key to superior firm performance and thus competitive advantage. It's this view or model systematically aids in identifying what the core competencies are, which in this model, it sees or identifies as some of the basic resources. So what are the two types or categories of resources? Well, here we go. Tangible and intangible. So tangible resources are visible physical attributes, labor, capital and cash, land, buildings, factories, equipment, supplies, and then intangible. These are invisible, non-physical attributes. So the culture of a company, knowledge, brand equity, reputation, which is also leads to brand equity, and then intellectual property. So intellectual property can be made of all sorts of things: patents, designs, copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets. We think of the special sauce or the Coca-Cola recipe. And the book makes the argument that the intangible resources are more important for competitive advantage than the tangible. And to a certain extent, that absolutely makes sense, because all of these things on the tangible side can be acquired by any other company out there. And of course, I'm oversimplifying it, but labor is essentially available to all. Cash can be available to all, right? Land, buildings, et cetera, et cetera. But culture, knowledge, brand equity, reputation, and then everything that makes up or goes into intellectual property are unique to individual companies. Okay, so here we are at Google. We're going to look at all of its resources. So some of the tangible resources it has are the cash on hand. At the end of 2018, and I know we're sitting in 2020 at the moment, it had $109 billion in cash on hand. They also have land. So these are the buildings like their server farms and the Googleplex out in Silicon Valley. And certain intangible things. Their brand. They're valued at $309 billion, but they've got this really recognizable, important brand. And then the Googleplex location. It's intangible in that, with its location in Silicon Valley, there are certain network of contacts that it has. It has access to tech-savvy workforce that are coming from the local colleges and universities. And there in Silicon Valley is a lot of venture capital money. And then, of course, it has its intellectual property. So patents, trademarks, trade secrets, things like its logarithms that help with the searches. So two critical assumptions of the resource-based view is resource heterogeneity. So a firm is a bundle of resources and capabilities, and this bundle differs across firms. So this is almost, you could say, the gestalt, if you will, or I'll hold that thought for a second, but I will talk about gestalt. And then resource immobility. So a firm has resources that tend to be sticky, and that don't move easily from firm to firm. A great example of this is Southwest Air with its customer delivery model, or its services delivery model, the things that make that up, the company culture, and also some of the things like the use of one type of plane. Well, this was tried, various other larger companies, airlines, tried to replicate this without success. And this gets me to the whole gestalt of the resource-based view. It essentially says that a company is the whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. In that, all these bundle of resources and the stickiness of them are unique to a successful company, and they cannot, or at least are not easily replicated across the industry or into another industry or by other firms. So there we go with part one. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that made sense. And following this will be part two. Thank you.